After 5 years of living in my house, my son and his wife won $75 million in the lottery. That same day, she pushed me out the door. "Get out to a nursing home. We don't need your pity." I smiled. "Dear, did you check the name on the ticket?" Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think that a house full of family was the greatest gift a woman could ask for in her old age. I was wrong. My name is Margaret Harlow. Most people call me Maggie. I am 68 years old, a retired school teacher, and for 31 years I lived in the same white clapboard house on Elm Creek Road in Denton, Ohio. My husband Gerald built the back porch with his own hands. He died of a heart attack in the driveway in the spring of 2016, and after that, it was just me, the house, and the sound of the wind through the oak trees he planted the year we got married. For 3 years after Gerald's death, I managed fine on my own. I had my pension, my garden, my neighbor Ruth, and enough sense to know that loneliness and helplessness are not the same thing. But when my son Daniel called me in the fall of 2019 and said that he and his wife Christine had hit a rough patch financially, his contracting business had slowed, they'd fallen behind on rent, I didn't hesitate. "Come stay with me," I said. "This house is too big for one person anyway." That was my first mistake. Not loving my son. That was never a mistake. The mistake was not asking more questions about Christine. She arrived with her chin already lifted at a slight angle, as if the air inside my house required evaluation before she chose to breathe it. She was 34, sharp-featured, with a talent for compliments that somehow left you feeling diminished. "What a cozy little place," she said, the first afternoon, looking up at the 12-foot ceilings in the living room. I smiled and showed her to the guest room, which I had repainted and furnished with a new mattress the week before their arrival. In those first months, it was manageable. Daniel helped me with the yard. Christine contributed to groceries sometimes. We had dinners together on Sundays. I told myself it was working. But I had been a teacher for 34 years, and teachers learn to read the room. By the second year, I noticed the small things. Christine rearranged my kitchen without asking. She moved Gerald's photograph from the mantel to a shelf in the hallway. When I put it back, she moved it again. She referred to the house as our place on the phone with her friends. She complained about my television habits, my cooking smells, the hour at which I woke up. Daniel said nothing. He had always been a gentle soul. Too gentle, Gerald used to say, though he meant it with love. By the third year, Christine had stopped knocking before entering my bedroom. By the fourth, she had begun to speak to me in the particular tone reserved for children and the senile. Slow, over-enunciated, with a bright, artificial smile. I said nothing. I watched. That is also something teaching had given me. Patience. Then, in the spring of 2024, I did something I had never done in my life. I bought a lottery ticket. Not out of desperation. I am not that kind of woman. I bought it because Ruth dared me to at the gas station on Route 9, and because it cost $2, and because sometimes at 68 you do small, foolish things just to feel the possibility of something unexpected. I bought 2 tickets. I kept one. On impulse, on pure passing generosity. I gave the second one to Daniel as he walked through the kitchen that evening. He thanked me without looking up from his phone. I forgot about it. 3 weeks later, the world changed. Daniel had checked his ticket, the one I gave him, and discovered 5 matching numbers and a bonus ball. The prize was $75 million. The house became something I didn't recognize. There were phone calls, lawyers, a financial advisor who arrived in a suit that cost more than my car. Christine floated through the rooms with a brightness that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with power. She bought new furniture and had it delivered before asking me. She spoke of investments and properties and our future with a frequency that excluded the word we entirely. I watched all of it from my kitchen table, drinking my morning coffee, and I felt something cold and quiet settle in my chest. And then came the morning it happened. It was a Tuesday. I remember that. I was standing at the kitchen counter slicing an apple when Christine walked in wearing a silk robe I'd never seen before, poured herself coffee from my pot, and said, without turning to look at me, "Maggie, we've been talking. You'd probably be more comfortable somewhere with people your own age. There's a very nice assisted living place on the other side of Denton. We'd cover the cost, of course." I set down the knife. I looked at her. She turned, finally, and her expression was not unkind, which was almost worse. It was the expression of someone doing the reasonable thing. "This is my house," I said. Something crossed her face then. The mask slipped. "Not for much longer," she said, and her voice was quiet and utterly certain. "We don't need your charity anymore, Maggie. We don't need you. Pack what you need." Daniel agrees. She walked out of my kitchen, the room where I had taught my son to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, where Gerald and I had sat on the last night of every year, drinking cider and talking about the one ahead. I stood there for a long moment, then I smiled. Because Christine had made one catastrophic error, and she didn't know it yet. She had never once asked me about the other ticket. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of Gerald's side of the bed. That is where I always went when I needed to think clearly. His side. The pillow had lost his smell years ago, but the habit remained. And sometimes habit is all that holds you together. I sat there for a long time. Let me be honest about what I felt in those first minutes, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering at this point in the story. I felt afraid. Not the sharp, dramatic fear of crisis, but the dull, grinding fear of the elderly and powerless. The fear that the world has quietly reorganized itself around you while you weren't looking, and that no one intends to tell you. I was 68 years old. I had a pension of $1,900 a month. My car was a 2014 Honda Civic with a slow leak in the left rear tire, and the two people I had sheltered, fed, and tolerated for 5 years had just informed me, with the calm efficiency of a business transaction, that my presence was no longer required. Was I surprised? Part of me was not. The signs had been there for 2 years, accumulating like water under a floorboard. But knowing a flood is coming does not make the water less cold. I made myself think practically. It was the teacher's instinct. When emotion threatens to overwhelm, reach for structure. I owned the house. That was the first fact. The deed was in my name, Margaret Ann Harlow, registered at the Denton County Clerk's office. I had bought this house with Gerald in 1991, and when he died, it passed to me entirely. No one had asked me to sign anything. No one had offered me money for it. No one had the legal right to remove me from it. Christine's declaration, not for much longer, was not law. It was threat. But threats from people with $75 million are not the same as threats from people without. I thought about that. I thought about what money could do. Lawyers, delays, harassment, pressure. I had read enough in the news to know that wealth changed the geometry of any dispute. They could make my life miserable even without any legal ground. They could contest my mental competency. They could claim I was no longer able to maintain the property. They could simply make living here so unpleasant that I chose to leave on my own. Had Christine already thought of that? Probably. She was not a stupid woman. She was a calculating one, which is more dangerous. I sat with the fear until it became something I could hold at arm's length. Then I got up, went to the small desk in the corner of my room, Gerald's desk, a roll top he'd inherited from his father, and opened the bottom left drawer. The lottery ticket was there, inside a plain white envelope, exactly where I had placed it 3 weeks ago, and then forgotten. I took it out. I looked at it. The numbers were printed in black ink on thin paper. 7 digits that corresponded, I now knew for certain, to a prize of $75 million. Because the ticket I had given Daniel was ticket number 2, the duplicate, and this was ticket number 1. Same drawing, same purchase, same register receipt still folded in the back of my wallet. Here is what no one in that house knew. In Ohio, a lottery prize belongs to the named claimant on the submitted ticket. You cannot claim a prize on a ticket you did not purchase unless ownership is legally established. I had purchased both tickets. I had the receipt. I had not signed the ticket I gave Daniel, and he, in his excitement, had not yet submitted it for official processing. He had a lawyer looking into it. That much I'd overheard through the wall, which meant there was still time. I knew I needed help, not family. Family had just demonstrated its value. I needed someone with legal knowledge and no stake in being polite about what I was facing. I picked up the phone and called Ruth. Ruth Calloway had been my neighbor for 22 years and my closest friend for most of them. She was 71, drove a truck, grew tomatoes that made mine look apologetic, and had zero patience for nonsense of any variety. She answered on the second ring. "Maggie, you never call before noon unless something's wrong." "Something's wrong," I said. I told her everything. The ticket, the scene in the kitchen, Christine's words, the $75 million, my ticket in the bottom drawer. I spoke steadily, without drama, the way I'd learned to report difficult things to parents at school conferences. When I finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have a lawyer?" "Not since we closed on the house in '91. My nephew David is in family and property law in Columbus. He's good, and he doesn't waste time. Can I call him today?" "Yes," I said. "Don't tell Daniel or Christine anything," Ruth said. "Not one word. If they ask where you're going or who you're talking to, you're visiting a friend or you're running errands. Can you do that?" "I taught middle school for 34 years, I said. "I can keep a secret from a 34-year-old. Ruth laughed, and for the first time since that morning, something in my chest loosened slightly. The plan was simple at this stage. Barely a plan at all, just a direction. Find a lawyer, establish what I actually owned and what rights I actually held. Then determine the question that had been circling in my mind since I looked at that ticket. Was it too late to act, or was there still time to change what was about to happen? I tucked the ticket back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I was not a woman who had ever needed rescuing. I did not intend to start now. 2 days later, I drove to Columbus. I told Christine I was visiting an old colleague from my teaching years, which was close enough to the truth that I felt no particular guilt about it. She didn't press me. She was on a video call with a real estate agent when I left. Walking through virtual tours of properties I suspected she was already imagining as hers. Daniel was in the garage. He lifted 2 fingers in a wave as I backed down the driveway. I waved back. The drive to Columbus was an hour and 20 minutes on Route 33. I listened to a public radio program about migratory birds and felt, for stretches of highway, almost peaceful. Ruth's nephew, David Calloway, had his office on the fourth floor of a modest building near the short North District. He was 39, methodical, with the particular calmness of a man who had heard a great many versions of family crisis and was no longer surprised by any of them. He offered me coffee, and I accepted, and then I put the lottery ticket on his desk along with the gas station receipt and explained the situation without editorializing. He examined both items carefully. He asked several questions. When had I purchased the tickets? Had I signed either ticket? Had Daniel signed the ticket in his possession? Had any formal claim been filed with the Ohio Lottery Commission? I answered each question in order. No, I had not signed either ticket. No claim had been filed yet. Daniel's attorney was still preparing the documentation, pending financial advice about tax structuring. David was quiet for a moment, studying the receipt. "This receipt shows 2 tickets purchased in sequence," he said. "With your card." He looked up at me. "You could establish purchase provenance. In Ohio, unsigned lottery tickets are legal bearer instruments, meaning ownership is based on possession and purchase evidence. But you've given 1 ticket voluntarily to your son. That complicates the picture." "Does it eliminate my claim?" I asked. "Not necessarily. You gave him a ticket as a gift, but the gift of a physical ticket and the gift of the winnings attached to it are 2 different legal questions, especially if the ticket was purchased with your funds and no documentation of the transfer of beneficial interest exists." He paused. "The more immediate issue is this. If he files that ticket for a prize claim, before you take any legal steps, the commission will process it and the money will move. Once that happens, recovery becomes exponentially harder." "How long before they can file?" "Claims on prizes of this size require original ticket submission and identity verification. His attorney needs to complete the tax structuring first, which typically takes 2 to 3 weeks in cases like this. My guess, you have 10 days, possibly 2 weeks, before they submit." 10 days. "What do I do?" David set down his pen. "First, I draft a legal notice, a letter asserting your ownership interest in the ticket and notifying the Ohio Lottery Commission of a disputed claim. This doesn't freeze the prize, but it creates an official record before any claim is filed. Second, we document everything: the purchase receipt, your bank statement showing the card transaction, a sworn affidavit from you about the circumstances." He looked at me carefully. "This will not be invisible. When they receive the notice, Daniel and Christine will know." "I know," I said. "Are you prepared for that?" I looked down at the ticket on his desk. $2 of thin paper that had somehow become the axis around which everything in my life was turning. I thought about Gerald's porch. I thought about Christine moving his photograph. I thought about the particular tone of her voice. "We don't need you." "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." David began typing. He pulled up the Ohio Lottery Commission's dispute notification protocol and walked me through it. He showed me the form used to assert a competing ownership claim prior to official prize submission. He explained that a notice filed in advance created a legal paper trail that would require the commission to acknowledge the dispute before releasing funds. It was not a guarantee. It was a flag planted in the ground. Then he showed me something else, something that made the room feel very quiet. He had searched the commission's public filing database while we spoke. Daniel's attorney had submitted a preliminary registration of intent to claim, a standard procedural step, 48 hours earlier. They had already started. "They're moving faster than expected," David said. "Christine," I said simply. He nodded. He understood without requiring elaboration. "Then we file today," he said. He prepared the notice that afternoon. I signed the affidavit. He notarized it. By 4 o'clock, the letter was sent by certified mail and electronic submission to the Ohio Lottery Commission's legal department, asserting that Margaret Ann Harlow, as the purchaser and original holder of both lottery tickets issued in transaction number 447-9182-C at the Rudders gas station on Route 9 in Denton, Ohio, maintained a legal ownership interest that had not been formally transferred, and requesting that no prize disbursement be made pending resolution of the dispute. David walked me to my car. "They will be angry," he said. "Yes," I said. "Are you safe at home?" I thought about that honestly. "They won't be physically dangerous," I said. "Christine is ruthless, not violent. And Daniel has never raised his voice to me in his life." "Call me if anything changes," he said. He gave me his cell number. "Don't discuss the case with them. If they confront you, say only that you're getting legal advice. You don't owe them details." I drove home in the late afternoon light, past fields going gold and flat, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not fear, but a deep and steady clarity. I had planted the flag. Now I would see who came to pull it up. I turned onto Elm Creek Road, pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine. The lights were on in every room of the house. I had not yet taken my coat off. I was still standing in the entryway, keys in hand, when Christine appeared at the end of the hallway. She was holding her phone, and her expression was the kind that has moved past anger into something colder and more deliberate. "We need to talk," she said. Daniel appeared behind her a moment later. He looked the way he had as a boy when he'd broken something, not so much guilty as afraid of what came next. I hung up my coat. I set my keys on the hook Gerald had installed by the door in 1994. Then I turned and walked into the living room and sat in my chair. Gerald's armchair, dark green, which Christine had twice tried to replace with something more modern. And I looked at them both and said, "All right." Christine sat on the edge of the couch. Daniel stood near the window. He couldn't quite hold my gaze. "We received a call from our attorney this afternoon," Christine said. Her voice was controlled, the way it always was when she was working hardest at composure. "Apparently, the Lottery Commission received a legal notice claiming a competing ownership interest in Daniel's ticket." She paused. "In your name." "Yes," I said. The single syllable seemed to land harder than she expected. "Maggie." Daniel's voice was strained. "What are you doing? That was a gift. You gave me that ticket." "I gave you a piece of paper," I said. "I didn't sign an agreement. I didn't file a transfer of ownership. I have the purchase receipt with my card number, and both tickets were bought in the same transaction." "That is not how gifts work," Christine said. "That is exactly how bearer instruments work under Ohio law," I said. David had given me those words specifically. I had practiced them in the car. Christine's jaw tightened. "This is a legal stunt. You're trying to steal money that belongs to us." I looked at her. "You told me 2 days ago to pack my things and leave my own house," I said. "You said you don't need my charity. So I decided to take your advice and stop being charitable." Silence. Then Christine leaned forward. Her voice dropped into a register I hadn't heard from her before. Not quite a threat, but the shape of one. "Maggie, you have no idea what you're starting. We have resources now. We can tie this up in litigation for years. We can file a counterclaim. We can challenge your cognitive competency. At your age, a judge might be very interested in whether you're capable of making sound legal judgments." She let that land. "Or we can make this go away quietly, right now. You drop the notice. We give you a generous allowance and you stay in the house as long as you want. Comfortable, taken care of." The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Elm Creek Road. I thought about the word comfortable. I thought about what it would mean to accept money from Christine, to become a dependent in my own home, tolerated, maintained, kept. The allowance would be a leash. The kindness would be a performance. And the first time I disagreed with her about anything, I would feel the length of the chain. "No," I said. "Mom." Daniel moved away from the window. His voice cracked slightly. "Please. This is our family. This isn't worth—" "You stood in this kitchen 2 days ago," I said quietly, "while your wife told me to go to an assisted living facility. You said nothing. You agreed." I looked at him steadily. "I don't know what this family is anymore, Daniel, but I know what this house is. It's mine." Christine stood up. For a moment, I thought she might actually say something honest, might drop the architecture of composure and speak plainly. But instead, she straightened her shoulders and said, "You'll regret this," and walked out of the room. Daniel lingered. He looked old to me in that moment, in a way he hadn't before. Tired and caught between two loyalties and not quite brave enough to honor either cleanly. "I'm sorry," he said. I wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. "Good night, Daniel," I said. He went upstairs. I sat in Gerald's chair for a long time after that, not moving. The threat about cognitive competency had been designed to frighten me, and it had a little. That was the most insidious kind of threat, the kind that uses your own vulnerabilities against you. I was 68. I lived alone in my routines. I was eccentric in the way of people who have stopped editing themselves for company. A clever attorney with the right framing could plant doubt. But doubt is not evidence. And I had a receipt, a bank statement, a notarized affidavit, and David Calloway. Over the next 3 days, I let myself rest. I slept. I read. I sat on Gerald's porch in the October cold with a blanket and a thermos of coffee and watched the oak trees lose their leaves. I did not engage with Daniel or Christine beyond the surface courtesies of shared space. I texted David each morning with any new developments. There were none. On the 3rd day, I felt the fear recede far enough that I could see past it. I was not comfortable. I was not safe in the easy sense of the word. But I was clear. And clear, I had learned a long time ago, was enough to work with. On the 4th morning after the confrontation, Christine came downstairs and made me breakfast. That was how I knew the strategy had changed. She set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table in front of me without a word, poured us both coffee, and sat down across from me with a small, careful smile. The silk robe was gone. She was wearing something ordinary, a gray cardigan I'd seen before, and her hair was pulled back simply. She had, I realized, studied how to appear less threatening. "I want to apologize," she said, "for the other night. I was cruel, and I shouldn't have been." I looked at the eggs. They were well made, properly seasoned, not overcooked. Christine was, among other things, a competent cook when she chose to be. "Thank you for breakfast," I said. "Maggie," she folded her hands on the table, "I know we've been difficult to live with. I know I haven't always been kind. But we're family. And I've been thinking, what if we started over? Really started over?" She paused with the precision of someone who has rehearsed the pause. "The money changes everything. We could buy a beautiful house for you wherever you want. The beach, if you like. Florida. Somewhere warm. Fully paid. In your name. No strings." I drank my coffee. "And the legal matter?" I asked. "If we can settle this between ourselves, keep lawyers out of it, I think everyone walks away better." She meant I would walk away with a house in Florida, and she would walk away with $75 million. I looked at her across my kitchen table. In my kitchen, in my house, in the chair where Gerald used to read the morning paper, and I felt something very calm settle over me, the way temperature drops just before a storm clears. "I'll think about it," I said. That was all I said. I finished my breakfast, thanked her again, and went to get dressed. Because here is the thing about that offer. A house in Florida, fully paid in my name, actually had monetary value. It was not nothing. And for approximately 45 seconds, as I stood in front of my closet choosing a sweater, I considered it as a real option. The honesty of that 45 seconds felt important to acknowledge. I am not a person who pretends to be above temptation. But then I thought about what I would be accepting. Not just a house. I would be accepting the premise that my home, my history, and Gerald's porch were worth less than the inconvenience I was causing Christine. I would be accepting that $75 million purchased the right to rewrite what belonged to whom. I would be accepting defeat, not because I had lost, but because the price offered for my surrender was high enough. I put on my blue cardigan and called Ruth. "She made you eggs," Ruth said when I finished telling her. "Very good eggs," I said. "Florida house." That was the offer. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "What did David say?" "I haven't called him yet. I wanted to call you first." "Call him second," she said. "Then come for dinner tonight. I'm making pot roast, and I want you to meet someone." That evening I drove to Ruth's. The someone turned out to be Pastor Carol Fenner from the First Methodist on Lincoln Street, who had been Ruth's friend since choir in the 90s. She was 65, recently retired from her congregation's official duties, but still very much present in the community, and she had, Ruth told me over pot roast, counseled more families through inheritance disputes than most people would believe. "People lose themselves over money," Pastor Carol said, cutting her bread with quiet efficiency. "Even people who seemed perfectly decent before it arrived." "Christine was never perfectly decent," I said. "No," Ruth said. "She was always this. The money just removed the reason to hide it." I told them both everything. The ticket, the legal notice, the threats, the eggs. Carol listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You're doing the right thing, and you're not alone in it. Half this town watched you take those two in 5 years ago, and not once complain. That surprised me. People noticed?" "Maggie," Ruth said, "we see what we see." I drove home that night, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Accompanied. Not rescued. Not advised. Simply seen. There were people who knew what had happened in that house, and who would be willing to say so, in whatever form saying so was required. Christine was in the living room when I got back, watching television with Daniel. She looked up when I came in. "Did you think about our conversation?" she asked. "I did," I said pleasantly. "Good night." I went to my room and called David. "Hold the course," he said when I told him about the offer. "An informal settlement now, without documentation, benefits them entirely. If they're offering, it means they're worried about what a formal proceeding looks like." He paused. "Has she escalated in any other way?" "Not yet," I said. "She will," he said. "When the soft approach doesn't work, they'll go harder. Be ready." I said goodnight and put the phone on the charger. Outside my window, the oak trees Gerald planted were bare now against the October sky. I sat with that view for a long while, the way you sit with something that has always been there, and you have not always understood the full value of. Then I set my alarm and went to sleep. They came on a Saturday, not separately, not casually. Together, and with the particular formality of people who have prepared what they are going to say. Daniel knocked on my bedroom door at 10 in the morning, which he almost never did, and asked if I would join them in the living room. I knew what this was. I had seen it in parent-teacher conferences. The united front, the practiced tone, the agenda dressed up as conversation. I put on my shoes and went. Christine was already seated, hands folded, wearing the gray cardigan again. The careful wife costume. Daniel sat beside her and left me the armchair, which I appreciated for the symbolism, if nothing else. "We want to have an honest conversation," Daniel began. He had clearly written this, or Christine had written it, and he had memorized it. No lawyers, no letters, just family. "All right," I said. "Mom." His voice was softer than I had heard it in years. For a moment, he sounded like himself, like the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard because he thought they were beautiful. "I know things have been hard, between all of us. And I know I should have spoken up more. I should have been more." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you better." It was well done. I felt the pull of it, the old attachment, the mother love that doesn't ask to be earned and doesn't disappear cleanly even when it should. I felt it, and I let it be felt, and I did not let it move me. "Thank you," I said. Christine leaned forward. "Maggie, we're not your enemies. We've been living together for 5 years. We've had hard moments, both of us. But at the end of the day, we're all we have. You're a widow. We're your family." She let that breathe. "If this goes to formal dispute proceedings, it will be public. It will be ugly. The Lottery Commission will have investigators asking questions. Neighbors will talk. Is that really how you want the next chapter of your life to look? Fighting your own son in court?" And there it was. Not the Florida house this time. The social threat. She was right that it would be public. She was right that it would be difficult and painful, and that people would talk. She was betting that the prospect of community judgment would frighten me more than losing. It was, I thought, her best argument. I gave it that much. "You said I had no family but you," I said slowly, looking at Christine. "You said the town would talk. But you also told me very recently that I should leave this house and go somewhere with people my own age. You told me you didn't need me." I paused. "Which is it? Am I indispensable family, or am I the elderly charity case you've outgrown?" Christine's composure slipped, not dramatically, just a fraction, the way a carefully arranged surface shifts when something beneath it moves. "That's not fair," Daniel said. "Isn't it?" I looked at him. "Daniel, did you or did you not stand in the kitchen and agree with your wife when she told me to leave?" He didn't answer. "I'm not angry with you," I said, and I meant it. I'm genuinely not. But I want you to understand why I'm doing this. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that I apparently needed to have money in order for my right to live in my own home to be taken seriously." My voice stayed even. "That's the honest conversation, if we're having one." The room was very quiet. Then Christine stood up. The careful wife costume was gone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clipped and sharp. "You are making a very serious mistake. David Calloway is a small-town attorney handling a case that is going to involve teams of people with considerably more resources. They will document every eccentricity, every lapse, every—" She stopped herself. "We are trying to give you a dignified way out. After Saturday, that offer is gone." "Thank you for letting me know," I said. She walked out. Her footsteps on the stairs were fast and hard. Daniel stood. He looked at me with something that might have been admiration, and might have been grief, and might have been both. "She won't stop," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. When Christine decides something, she doesn't stop." "Neither do I said. He left. I sat alone in the living room for a while after that. My hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. Let me be honest about that too. I was frightened. The mention of documenting eccentricities and lapses had gone exactly where it was intended to go. I was 68. I forgot where I put things. I talked to Gerald's photograph sometimes, quietly, just to hear myself say his name. Any of those things, framed correctly, could be made to look like something they weren't. I breathed. I stayed with the fear. And here is what I found underneath it. The same thing I had found at 63 when I was first diagnosed with the arrhythmia that turned out to be manageable, and at 44 when Daniel was in the accident that turned out not to be serious, and at 57 when Gerald collapsed in the driveway. I found the place in myself that had always continued, that had always put one foot after the other, regardless of whether the ground ahead was certain. That place was still there. I took out my phone and texted David. They offered a deadline. Saturday. He replied within 10 minutes. Good, means they're afraid of the commission timeline. Stay the course. I'll call you tomorrow. I put the phone down. I looked at Gerald's photograph on the mantel. I had moved it back a third time, and Christine had not moved it again. He looked, as he always looked in that photograph, calm and a little amused, as if he knew something you hadn't quite figured out yet. I know, I said to the photograph. I'm working on it. The Ohio Lottery Commission's dispute mediation meeting was scheduled for a Thursday, 3 weeks after David filed our notice. It was not a courtroom. It was a conference room on the 7th floor of a state office building in Columbus. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a long table with plastic water bottles, and a mediator named Gregory Sims, who wore bifocals and spoke with the measured deliberation of a man who had seen many families reduced to their worst elements across tables exactly like this one. Daniel and Christine arrived with 2 attorneys. I arrived with David. Christine was dressed formally, in a charcoal blazer, and she sat with the posture of someone who had already decided how this ended. Daniel sat beside her. He looked at me once when I came in, and then looked at the table, and kept looking at the table for most of what followed. Gregory Sims opened the proceeding by explaining its purpose. This was not a judicial hearing, but a formal dispute resolution process before the commission determined how to proceed with the contested prize claim. Both parties would present their positions. Documentary evidence would be reviewed. The commission had the authority to delay disbursement pending further legal action, or to establish provisional findings that would inform subsequent court proceedings. Christine's lead attorney, a man named Whitfield, from a firm in Cleveland, went first. He was polished and methodical. He argued that the ticket had been given freely and without reservation as a gift. He cited an Ohio appellate case establishing that informal gifts of personal property are legally recognized even without documentation. He argued that my legal notice was an attempt to retroactively rescind a completed gift motivated by a family dispute, not a genuine ownership claim. He used the phrase opportunistic interference twice. He was good at his job. Then David spoke. He was not as polished as Whitfield. He did not try to be. He placed 3 documents on the table: the gas station receipt showing a single card transaction for 2 tickets, my bank statement confirming the charge to my account, and a printed summary of Ohio Lottery Commission Regulation 3770:1-9-08, which establishes that prize entitlement for bearer instrument tickets requires documented proof of purchase in the absence of prior signed transfer. Mrs. Harlow purchased both tickets, David said, with her card, in a single transaction. There is no signed document transferring ownership of the winning ticket to Daniel Harlow. There is no witness transfer. There is no contemporaneous record of any kind establishing that the beneficial interest in the winnings passed from purchaser to recipient. He paused. Mr. Harlow received a piece of paper. That piece of paper has not been legally established as a gift of its associated financial rights. Whitfield objected that the distinction was academic, that gifts of property do not require documentation. David agreed. in ordinary circumstances. But this is not an ordinary circumstance. The asset in question is worth $75 million. The Commission's own regulations require clear evidence of purchase provenance in disputed claims. Mrs. Harlow has provided that evidence. The opposing party has provided testimony. Gregory Sims removed his bifocals and set them on the table. Mrs. Harlow, he said, looking at me directly for the first time. In your own words, what was your intent when you gave the ticket to your son? Every head in the room turned toward me. I had thought about this question for weeks. I had turned it over every morning with my coffee and every night before sleep. What had my intent been? I had given Daniel a lottery ticket on impulse, carelessly, the way you hand someone a piece of gum. I had not intended to give him $75 million because $75 million had not existed yet. I had given him a $2 slip of paper. I gave him a ticket, I said. The same way I might give someone a birthday card. I didn't think about it. I certainly didn't think about prize disbursement rights, because at the time I gave it to him, the ticket was worth $2. I looked at Gregory Sims steadily. If I had handed him $2 in cash that day instead of a ticket, and then that cash had somehow become worth $75 million, I don't believe anyone at this table would argue that the transformation in value was also part of the gift. Whitfield began to object. Christine put her hand on his arm, which meant stop. She leaned forward. This was when she made her mistake. This is absurd, she said. Her voice had shed its professional distance. She was speaking now as herself, without the architecture. She gave him the ticket. He won. End of story. She is trying to steal from her own son because we asked her to be realistic about her living situation. This is spite. Her voice was rising. This is an old woman's spite, dressed up in legal language, and everyone in this room knows it. The room went quiet, in the way rooms do when someone has said the precise wrong thing. Gregory Sims put his bifocals back on. David said nothing. He did not need to. I looked at Christine across the table. Her face was flushed. Her composure, maintained for weeks through breakfasts and living room performances and rehearsed apologies, was gone. What remained was what had always been underneath it. The absolute conviction that she was owed what she wanted, and a genuine inability to understand why the world was not cooperating. Old woman, I said quietly, more to myself than to the room. Daniel finally looked up from the table. His face was pale. Whitfield spent another 40 minutes presenting arguments, but the shape of the thing had changed. The mediator asked several procedural questions. David answered them. I signed 2 additional documents confirming my account and card details. Gregory Sims closed the session by stating that the Commission would issue a formal finding within 5 business days, and that prize disbursement would remain suspended pending that finding. We walked out into the corridor and then the elevator, and then the parking lot, where the November sky was flat and gray, and the trees along the boulevard had lost every leaf. Christine walked past me without speaking. Daniel stopped. "Mom?" he said. I waited. He seemed to be searching for something. A sentence, a position, some arrangement of words that would allow him to stand in 2 places at once. He didn't find it. "I don't know how this ends," he said. "I do," I said gently. I got into my car. I sat for a moment before starting the engine. I was not triumphant. Not yet. But I was still. And the stillness felt for the first time in weeks like something that belonged entirely to me. David called on a Tuesday morning, 5 days after the hearing. I was in the garden, cutting back the dead stalks of the coneflowers, cold enough to see my breath. I pulled off my glove and answered. "The Commission issued its finding," he said. I stopped moving. "They ruled in your favor. The purchase documentation was sufficient to establish your ownership interest. In the absence of a signed and witnessed transfer document, they've declined to process Daniel's claim. The prize remains suspended." I stood in my garden with dead flower stalks in one hand and my phone in the other and said nothing for a moment. "What happens next?" I asked. "Their attorneys will advise them that a civil challenge is possible, but the commission's finding becomes part of the legal record and creates a very unfavorable starting position." Given Christine's statement on record, he paused. "Her outburst in the hearing room wasn't helpful to them. It's in the transcript." "I know," I said. "To claim the prize in your name, you'll need to submit your ticket promptly. Can you come to Columbus this week?" "Thursday," I said. I submitted the ticket on Thursday. The verification process took 11 days. During those 11 days, I continued to live in my house on Elm Creek Road. Daniel and Christine continued to live there too. We passed each other in hallways. We did not eat together. The house felt pressurized, like air inside a sealed jar. Christine did not speak to me at all after the hearing. I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that this was preferable to the previous arrangement. Daniel knocked on my door one evening. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "No," I said, "but thank you for asking." When the commission confirmed my claim, I sat down with a letter David had helped me prepare. A formal notice giving Daniel and Christine 60 days to vacate the property. I delivered it in person to each of them in the kitchen. I set a copy in front of Christine first. She read it without expression. Then she said, "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said. After everything, I agreed." She stood up and left the kitchen. 30 minutes later, I heard suitcases being pulled from the closet upstairs. Daniel didn't read his copy. He just looked at me. "I understand," he said. And perhaps this is the most complicated part of the story, because Daniel was my son, and I did not stop loving my son. What I stopped doing was allowing that love to be used as a door through which things that were not love could enter my home. That is not the same thing. They were gone in 3 weeks. Whitfield, the Cleveland attorney, withdrew from the case after reviewing the commission's findings and the recorded transcript. Without representation and without a viable claim, the formal challenge faded. On the last morning, Daniel came downstairs with 2 bags. Christine had already taken her things to the car. He stood in the entryway and looked at the hook on the wall, the tiled floor, the staircase he had climbed 10,000 times. "This is really goodbye," he said. "It doesn't have to be," I said. "But it's goodbye to this version." "Yes." He hugged me. I held my son for a moment, and I held him back, and I did not cry, though it was close. Then he picked up his bags and walked out. I watched them drive away down Elm Creek Road, past Gerald's oak trees, and around the bend where the road curved south. Then I closed the door. I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I was alone in my house, and my house was mine. Spring came early that year. I noticed it first in the garden. A green so tentative and pale you had to look carefully to see it, pushing up through the cold ground along the south fence. 20 tulips in red and yellow, and 1 deep purple. I didn't remember choosing, but was glad to have. I stood there in my old coat and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a very long time. The prize, after federal and state taxes, came to approximately $38 million. My financial advisor, Patricia Lowe, asked me, in our first meeting, what I actually wanted my life to look like in 5 years. No one had asked me that in a very long time. I kept the house. I had the back porch repaired. Gerald had built it, and it had needed attention for 3 years. When the carpenter was done, I sat out there with coffee and read for 2 hours and felt something very close to complete. I established a scholarship fund through the Denton School District. 3 annual scholarships for graduating seniors going into education. I named it for Gerald. The superintendent cried when I told him. I traveled. Ruth came with me to Portugal in May. We walked along the coast, ate bread with olive oil, drank wine on a terrace above the sea. Ruth said it was the best trip of her life which made it the best trip of mine. And Daniel? He and Christine separated 8 months after they left my house. What had been underneath their marriage, apparently, was not enough to hold. Christine moved to Phoenix. I don't seek information about her, and none reaches me naturally. Daniel called me in September. I saw his name on the phone and sat with it for a long moment before I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hello, Daniel." A pause. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked for 40 minutes. His work, the weather, nothing remarkable. Before we hung up, he said, "Are you happy?" I looked out the window at the oak trees, full in summer green. "Yes," I said, and it was true. We speak now, occasionally. Not with the same weight of assumption as before, but honestly. More honestly than we had spoken in years. What was destroyed between us was not the love. It was the illusion that love, with no honesty underneath it, is enough to sustain anything real. I had dinner with Ruth that week and told her all of this. She listened, then said, "You know what Gerald would say?" "He'd say I should have fixed the porch 3 years ago," I said. "He'd say that too," Ruth agreed. We laughed, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the oak trees moved in the evening wind, and I was finally, utterly, and without reservation, home. They say that family is everything, and I believe that. I just learned to read the word more carefully. Family is not the people who share your roof. It is the people who see you clearly and stay anyway. It is honesty, even when it costs something. It is love that does not require you to disappear. I planted tulips in the fall without knowing if I'd be there to see them. I was there. Whatever you are facing right now, whatever door someone is trying to push you through, you have the right to ask whose name is on the deed. What would you have done in my place? I'd love to know. Leave a comment, and thank you truly for listening to my story.